Hey, everybody. This is just a pre show. We're not going to start for another few minutes, but we are on, so we thought we would come and hang out. Happy to be doing the show today. I wasn't sure I was going to. Anyone keeping up with me knows I got a lot of stuff going on. Your lighting looks kind of sweet, Arlen.
It's my mom's set up for Zoom and stuff for she does a lot of meetings
Mm,
online. So um this is my dad rigged up this thing to hold the
oh,
blanket so that
nice.
she could have a backdrop that isn't just the living room.
If we knew each other better, I would have made like one of those only fans jokes or something when you said she did a lot of online meetings.
hmm
Do you know what OnlyFans is or no?
Isn't it like Patreon but for porn?
I think so. Yeah, kind of.
Yeah.
I don't really know. I don't have one. I only hear people make jokes about it, so I'm just assuming that's what he's like. That's not funny, Hobbs. You son of a biscuit.
It is about my mom, so
Uh-huh,
you
I know.
know.
I know. Well, we do have Fiddling Beaver watching us on Twitch. So. Oh, this is recorded on Twitch, by the way, Hobbs, you moron. Anyway, oh, and YouTube, I guess. Actually, maybe
Yep.
we should edit this out.
Yeah, can we cut this line?
Just get rid of the last 10 minutes, please. Oh God, I'm just gonna play the music. But I mean, we almost have to wait for 6:30, don't we?
Yeah, we can wait another 3 minutes.
All right. So what else is going on, man? You got any gaming you've been doing?
I have not been doing any gaming. Been reading a lot because I'm over here. I've been working like 3 hours a day for the past day or two since I'm over here, and it's hard to get any of my real work done. So I'm gonna have to make up the time. So it's not like I'm on. It's sort of like a false vacation where you have to deal with all the shit that you put off anyway. So,
Mm-hmm.
but it's nice. I'm just hanging out here with the dog, Clover. She's pretty cool. She really likes when I am sitting or lying on the couch. She wants to be squeezed up next to me as kind of squeezed as possible.
That's nice.
Yeah, it's nice. It's kind of cozy just hanging out with her. She and reading real books and game books and all sorts of stuff.
That is awesome. I've really been doing is Calmata really,
hmm
and then I got a Midlands game. So Calmata on Friday, and then Midlands on Saturday. I'm gonna hit that Conan game up. Um, but yeah, I mean, I haven't even I put my other game, my Sunday morning game, on hiatus now as well,
hmm
along with White Sands and North Marches.
Yeah.
So yeah, but I'm pretty stoked myself.
Yeah.
I used a new product that I've been pimping to. Oh, you were there for the Calmata game, so you saw me talking about filling the hexes book.
Yeah. 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 It created a interesting little hex for us to mess around with.
Yeah, it was crazy, wasn't it? I mean,
Yeah.
I'm not sure you'll find exactly what you guys encountered in that book, but it helped create that for sure.
Yeah.
I actually thought that Fiddling Beaver was a bot. I don't know why I thought that because they followed me 2 days ago, and so when I called them out, I did it the wrong way. You're not supposed to call people out on Twitch unless they actually chat. So
hmm
I thought somehow that the name Fiddling Beaver and me giving you crap about your mom having an OnlyFans site kind of fit somehow. And I don't know. There was some synchronicity there that is probably cut. Let's just go back again.
Yeah.
All right, I'm going to start the recording for the show. So I'm going to start this thing and then I'm going to kick the music. Are you ready?
I'm ready.
All right, I'll start the introduction so you don't have to worry about it. Here we go. Hey everyone, welcome to the Libram Society, a literary live show where myself and my co host introduce books and short stories to you and dive so deep into them that we're not always sure we're going to come up on the other side. I am Jason Hobbs.
And I'm Arlen Walker.
So today, Arlen, normally this is an even numbered episode, episode number 6, and we'll often have guests, but due to a problem, scheduling as always, we don't have a guest. So you guys are just stuck with the two of us today. Arlen, you got anything did you know that you wanted to talk about today?
Anything did you know to talk about? I don't think so. Not about. I think you're the one who knows more about this book, so you're more likely to have something that people might not know.
Oh, all right. Well, maybe we'll just kind of cover that as we go. So today we are doing. This is my copy of the book. It's not too exciting because I took the dust jacket off, but we are doing a story out of Thieves' World, which is the first book in a series about a city or a town called Sanctuary. And it was edited by Robert Asprin and Lynn Abbey. And
Yep.
it was I think it was one of the first anthologies not a first anthology, but it had something special about it. It was an anthology that authors could use each other's characters. Right?
Yeah.
Have you heard of anything before this that did that?
I don't think so.
So, and this kind of spawned some other books that did it, which we may get into later. That's why I made Arlen buy Liavek as well, which is similarly a similar concept, I guess we should say. But so the whole idea of Thieves' World was there's two editors. It all pretty much takes place in the same city, Sanctuary. And you can use each other's characters, but you can't kill them off. You can put them in predicaments, and then everything is canon. But the what do you call it? Not first person or third person. What is that called in general? Do you even know what my question is? Probably not.
Uh, the narration.
Yeah, I guess the narration doesn't have to be reliable. So if something happens or someone says something about another character, someone could say something a little different or even contradictory, and it's up to the reader maybe to decide who they're going to believe. But so in some ways, what I always kind of likened this to was a fantasy role-playing game comic book in the Marvel universe, but more like New York almost, where you had multiple Marvel superheroes in New York who sometimes interacted, but it always kind of depended on who was writing at the time, who was more powerful or what they could do or whatever. So,
Yeah.
did you get that impression from this?
Yeah, I think there's definitely some of that to this. I was thinking about your question about earlier versions of this concept of using someone else's character. Obviously, so the things that come to mind, so there's with sort of folk tales or fairy tales, obviously
Everybody does, right?
everybody does. And
Camelot.
then there's also because it seems like this may have been at least partly inspired by the growth of the various, since it is also within that sort of period in fantasy literature, the various like Conan pastiches and things like that, there were other people using Howard's characters,
Well, that
right?
is very interesting you say that because Andrew Offutt is most known for his Conan
Yep.
stories.
Yep.
And that is who the author of the story that we're going to delve into today of Shadowspawn is. So, you got anybody over on YouTube you want to mention?
Nobody over on YouTube right now.
Oh my God, we've lost all of our people. It's just you
I
and I,
know.
Arlen, and Fiddling Beaver. That's all right, though. That sounds like a good group to me. All right, so is there anything else we need to cover about what Sanctuary or what the Thieves World books are? Oh, it's Robert Lynn Asprin. I thought it was two guys that edited it. Maybe it's just Robert Lynn Asprin. Maybe I always thought it was two people, but it's not.
Robert Lynn Asprin and Lynn Abbey, I think.
Oh, Lynn Abbey. That's right. For this particular copy that I have, which what it is it's the collection of the first three books according to when I bought this, it's the only collection they've done of the Thieves World books, and it's only the first three. So Thieves World actually, this is saying, came out in 1979, and I don't see. I know the person that you mentioned, Aspirin, was involved before, but I don't see that anywhere in any of these.
Hmm.
I see Lynn Abbey as an author, but not as an editor in here. But I know that I remember that name being on them. Maybe that happened later in the series that they became.
Maybe Lynn Abbey edited later on in the series. Yeah.
Yeah, she's definitely an author in the Thieves World book because she wrote The Face of Chaos. So, pretty interesting. Anyway, so like I say, this particular tome has the first three, which are Thieves World, Tales from the Vulgar Unicorn, and Shadows of Sanctuary. In some way, I think I've often forgot that the first book was called Thieves World, and I've always just considered them Tales from the Vulgar Unicorn because I don't if that one resonated the most with me or what. I don't know for sure. But let's do what we were gonna. So first impressions. What's your thoughts on the concept and this particular story?
I think the concept is really interesting. And I liked this story quite a bit. I thought it was a fun story. It has a kind of interesting, unique flavor in some ways, I would say, because I think partly because of the way that it's told and it embraces that kind of, um, very, very kind of uh, voice heavy, if that makes sense. That a lot of the story is characters talking to other characters about things that are happening, and so you get a lot of their kind of particular character and their particular voice in those sequences.
Yeah.
Which I liked a lot, and I thought it was fun. I don't know if I've read any other Andrew Offutt, um, but I thought this one was pretty good.
Okay, good. Because I was a little concerned when you compare it to the other stories that we have, or even in some ways Malazan, that I don't know if it has the depth to live up to that. It almost feels like a kind of a B movie, B Swords and Sorcery, or a D&D B movie in some ways. But
Yeah,
I think a lot of people were inspired and brought into what D&D is in many ways by these books. Because I mean, it was 79, but maybe a lot of us didn't really read them until, and then maybe they didn't get even hear about them till the third book, which was say 82 or 83. And then you have this idea of almost the perfect setup for a game, especially if instead of it being it's because it's kind of a frontier city. It's got danger all around it. There's not really a individually strong faction that controls everybody. There's multiple factions that have to interact with each other, and you can interact with them as a character. It also kind of has that idea of a lot of thieves around in a town, so it maybe gives those types of characters more things to do. Like, for instance, a lot of times you think of a thieves guild as, okay, we're the guild. If you're not in here, we're attacking you and not taking you out as a thief. Or if any thieves come from another town, they have to, check in with us first, or there's problems. Well, in
yeah,
Sanctuary, I don't. It really feels more like a criminal organization, like Jubal's masked men are a criminal organization. If you read more of the stories, you'll see other organizations that are kind of like that as well, but they're not necessarily together. They're more kind of uh, at odds, but there is sort of a honor among thieves amongst them, which is interesting to me. And I could see what that draw, like this was the first, when I had my own D&D setting, this was the first kind of IP that I actually ever used. Because there was I don't know, in early 80s, there was actually a release called, that was Sanctuary RPG or Thieves World RPG. And there was a map that was basically identical to this. So like my book has it here, if you guys can see it. So it's got a map. It shows where Sanctuary is. It kind of explains, where the mountains are and everything. And then in the next page, it's actually got kind of a rundown of what Sanctuary looks like. And so, I mean, I had that map, and then I had a map of the maze, and then I had detailed the maze where I wanted it to and everything. So, really, for me, influential. It was very influential in the way I played because I played in this, and then I put a dungeon right next to it, which was based off of the one from the Advanced Dungeons and Dragons first edition dungeon in the Dungeon Master's Guide. So I used that exact map that was in there. So it was called Xenopus's Tower, I think, even really based off of the old homes, which is what I started with. So did you have any thoughts preliminarily of what you think about what you would do maybe it as a wide base for with Thieves World itself, or did it speak to you in a gaming way in any way?
It definitely, I felt like the kind of the pacing and the energy of the story is something that I like to think that I bring to a number of my games. That you have a really one of the things that I think that I'm pretty good at with writing games or writing sessions of games, coming up with stuff for characters to do, all that sort of stuff, is controlling that kind of pacing and energy so that it feels like there's, always something that's kind of ready to happen next when we get to kind of a lull in the action, and the lull, that the lull doesn't go on for too long. So that I felt like and that's kind of a classic kind of pulpy fiction thing, right? Is that strong sense of a really, really tightly paced story where there's a lot of kind of moving parts and each one kind of takes precedence at a different moment. In terms of gaming, with this world, I don't know about using this particular world, although certainly the idea of a kind of a town that's sort of a thieves' den in a lot of ways is something that I've definitely used or tinkered with those sorts of concepts. In my current Shadow of the Demon Lord game, the characters are in a large city where there's a lot of kind of crime and problems and that sort of stuff because the imperial government has become less and less effective. And so the characters are sort of they're mercenaries who are sort of being employed as guards, and so they get to sort of walk the line between being kind of more like actual guards and more like kind of more mercenary at times, essentially. So I like that concept a lot. Certainly, this kind of hive of scum, basically, that they're all kind of working to sort of get the edge up on the other one and all that sort of stuff. That's something that I think is really appealing for gaming.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, it's like I've mentioned previously, I think it's almost the perfect setup. And as a game master, you could, lean into, or even as players, lean into wherever you want to as far as that goes. So we were talking about this editor's note first off.
Yeah.
Do we need to read it, or do we just want to do a synopsis of it, or?
I think we can just do a synopsis of it.
Okay. So basically, I think what the editor's saying is that you're going to see inconsistencies in the characters, which makes sense because different people are actually writing the characters. But he emphasizes through italics that these are not inconsistencies, and you should consider the contradictions again, bearing three things in mind. You want to go over them?
Yeah, the first is that the stories are told from different viewpoints. The second is that the people of Sanctuary are paranoid and alter the information that they present. And the third is that because the Sanctuary is such a competitive environment, it doesn't do you any good to act like you're the second best thief or the second best swordsman in Sanctuary.
Yeah, I really kind of like that idea. There's actually a real this may be weird for me to bring sports ball into this, considering what this is, but just today there was a mention of a pretty famous basketball player who said he thinks not only is he the best defensive player playing right now, but he's the greatest of all time. And a lot of people took umbrage to that, with the understanding that they accept him thinking that he is, because he almost has to in order to be as successful as he is. This is about Draymond Green, if anyone wants to know, from the Golden State Warriors in the NBA. But there are other people saying, you better check yourself thinking you're the best ever. You may not even be the best right now, but we understand that you think you're the best ever and that you need to think that in order to continue with the confidence that you have. So it kind of reminds me of that. And it's interesting that we can even relate that to, obviously this totally different, but in some ways you can take some similarities there. So well done reading that. Let's move into the introduction. The introduction is actually by Robert Lynn Asprin. Is that his name again? I'm getting him confused. Yeah,
Yeah,
no, okay. Lynn
Robert
Abbey.
Asprin.
It is? Yeah,
Robert
Robert Lynn
Lynn
Asprin.
Asprin and Lynn Abbey. Yes.
Jesus Hobbs. All right.
No.
Anyway, so
Why'd you pick this book?
because like I said, I thought that in many ways this is a very influential book to a lot of people, especially my age and who may have started with role-playing games in the late 70s and early 80s. And it also makes, because that's kind of maybe the Iron Age time of comics, and people were looking for grittier, and this is kind of a grittier book than The Wizard of Earthsea or Tolkien or any number of, even like Sword and Sorcery of Howard or any of those other ones. In many ways, this has kind of this gritty, not larger than life characters. They're just kind of regular characters trying to do larger than life things. So it fits in with that kind of concept of the Iron Age or something. And I think people wanted that at the time. I don't know why, but it was a time when even the youth were thinking, no, we're just regular people trying to become something bigger, as opposed to bigger than everybody else and then fitting those shoes. Thoughts?
Yeah, no, that definitely. I hadn't considered the Iron Age connection, but now that you mention it, I can totally see that idea that this is a flavor of fantasy that is to some of that other fantasy, kind of the way that Iron Age is to some of those other comics. That's an interesting point.
Yeah, maybe that's something that we could delve into at a later time, or consider, or do an episode about, where we're comparing types of literature through a timeline that maybe would coincide with other things.
Yeah,
Kind of
yeah.
interesting. So anyhow, this first, in the introduction, we're looking at the Emperor, and it's the actual Emperor of the Rankin Empire, who we never really see again. We got a couple pages here. We meet a couple characters, meaning the Emperor. I don't even know if we know what his name is, and his head advisor, Killite is what I was saying. What were you saying?
That sounds
Killite,
good to me.
Killite. I don't know. But basically, they're talking about the Emperor's stepbrother, and that basically the Emperor doesn't want his blood on his hands, so he doesn't want to kill him. So they have to decide what they want to do. And there's two problems, but they also do a kind of a nice expose almost on what sanctuary is, right?
Yep.
They kind of explain very briefly. They kind of explain where it is, that it's a small town on the southern tip of the empire and has lost pretty much all relevancy. But they need a new military governor because the old one's retiring, but they deserve more than, Arlen Walker. They deserve someone important, but not quite as Jason Hot. No, I'm just kidding. So they want him to be maybe of Emperor royal blood, if that's what you would call it. I don't know. But like I say, is there anything valuable in this first part, in your opinion?
I think it just sets us up for kind of, obviously the story itself. Shadowspawn revolves around this the new military governor, the Emperor's half brother, Catechithis.
Nice. I say
Yeah.
Cadacithus is what I've always said. Cadacithus, and you said Catechithus. He's also
Yeah.
known as Kitty Cat, so
Yep.
maybe the Kitithus. I don't know. Cadacithus is what I always said, but anyway, it doesn't matter. You're right.
Well,
It does. To me, I mean,
yeah.
it's important for us to know that the emperor does not want to kill his stepbrother. First of all, that's
Yep.
something. Second of all, his advisor has many less scruples, and then
Yep.
it teaches us about sanctuary pretty much,
Yep.
like a nice little opening to a movie or something maybe. All right, so the second portion of the introduction, it gets a little deeper, and we meet pretty much our first character in Sanctuary. You want to cover this?
Yeah, so we have Hakim the storyteller licked the dust from his lips as he squinted at the morning sun, and so we talk about this character who will appear. Hakim appears in Shadowspawn, also, um, and he's in right. This is all in Sanctuary. This section,
Yep.
yeah. And so this is sort of. Um, a bit more largely about the history, right? He's telling these boys about the history of Sanctuary, for at least the first part.
This this small little section of the introduction here, part 2 of the introduction,
Uh-huh.
is almost a direct inspiration to the beginning of Kalmata.
Uh-huh.
Did you figure that out already, or my
I did
my
not.
because I do that introductory. I read the introduction for Kalmata when it starts, and it starts with basically a storyteller surrounded by kids. So
Yeah.
this is almost I it's not an identical lift. It's not like I stole it straight out of here, but this is how I use this in a game. Basically, my little box text is this idea of this storyteller. I think that this is also the second part is also a really good example of showing how mercenary the people of Sanctuary are. Like the storyteller, it's through his eyes, and basically how easy I want to go drinking today. Oh, I'm stuck telling stories to these kids, but they got coins, so I'm going to do it anyway. And
Yep.
even the kids themselves have kind of a pecking order, and they know the rules, which kind of speaks to the rules of how the people of Sanctuary deal with each other, even though they're all a mercenary capitalistic lot.
Hmm.
So I think it does a good job. Like I don't really know that this story or any part of these books has like a deeper meaning or is a reflection on the real world, um, other than incidentally. You know how we talk about maybe they were trying to do that with a voice in the night, or even before that, a Hollowland, where had a lot of religious allusion and connotation. I don't know if any of that happens in any of these. I don't know if they're that deep necessarily, but I think we can really get a lot out of a few words. So there is some tersity to the text here, and it's fun. It's kind of fun with a lot of dialogue. Any thoughts on the third part?
The plan, the
The
third part?
plan, yeah.
Yeah. Well, again, we have characters that we'll see later on in Shadowspawn. Um,
Hey, Lord Zordran, welcome to the show, my man. Glad to have you. Feel free to speak up. We're looking for a raucous crowd here. You got anybody over in YouTube before you go on?
Yeah, we have Crumb, who says, "Hiding in shadows over here, you guys are legit. I can see how this book would inspire added depth to the shady side of gaming."
Mm.
And James Richards says, "Hello."
All right. Totally. I totally agree with both of you guys. Hello, and that's what this is all about, really. And I think isn't that what most urban games usually are going to have some aspect to, even if the characters themselves aren't involved in shadowy endeavors, their foils are going to probably have some, because there's political machinations here too, right? We know
Yeah,
that there are, I think I forgot to mention in part 2 that Prince Kadakithis actually shows up.
yeah, he shows up right at the end. His one of his guards kicks at Hakim. Uh,
Hakim.
or something, kicks over the maps, does something, and the prince stops him and ends up giving coins to Hakim. Um, and that becomes important in Shadowspawn actually, because that's why um, Shadowspawn Hans um, sends Hakim to the prince, right? Is because he's heard the story about this moment.
Right, and who wouldn't? Because Hakeem got gold coins from him. This is
Yep.
definitely a story that seems like the silver or even copper, which will let me. In one of my campaigns, I was inspired by these books to not have a gold standard. In fact, it was a tin standard. So it was all the way down. Things were cut down all the way down into tin, and that would have been the same as silver. And then silver was, I guess it was still a gold standard, but it went way down with the value of things that to just make it feel like you're at a much lower class or something. Hey, Fiddling Beaver says having a society built on stealing and blood work sounds highly unstable. It does, which is why they took these extra pages to talk about having the emperor's stepbrother be in charge and his really powerful guard called the Hellhound, which are there to keep the peace. But there's only seven of them, and part 3 of this introduction explains how Prince Cadakithus plans to deal with the thievery that's run riot. But we
Mhm.
learn in in Andrew Offutt's story Shadowspawn that he hasn't gotten there quite yet, but his
No.
methodology may be the best, really, to bring the people around. Is there anything else you wanted to say about this introduction?
Oh, I was gonna add two things. So first off, we have another comment on YouTube. Wardrobe plays World War II. Just subbed a few days ago based on your OSE content. So thanks for all those APs. Um, we hope you'll stick around for Libram Society Wardrobe because we're enjoying doing book stuff. And then I was reading Tales from the Fallen Empire for DCC, which is a sword and sorcery setting, and they use iron as their core coinage, but it goes up to silver. So the equivalent of like a platinum or electrum piece is a silver piece, but
Mm-hmm.
the equivalent of a gold piece is an iron piece, and it goes down to like tin as the lowest, I think, for coinage.
Shout out to James Caprio, author of Tales from a Fallen Empire.
Yeah,
Thanks, buddy. I played in a
it's a
game
good
with him.
book.
Did I tell you that?
Nice.
Yeah, I played in a game with him at Game Hole Con 2 years ago, I think.
Cool.
Yeah, it was a fun game. It was cool meeting him. I think we'll have him on
Yeah.
Hobbs and Friends someday, or maybe we'll have him on here and see what we can find out what his literary inspirations for Tales from a Fallen Empire were. That might be
Yeah.
fun. All right, so we're moving right along. So there is a small, I don't know, introduction almost to the Shadowspawn story. Oh, Lord
Yep.
Zodran says, I always enjoyed Terry Pratchett's take on regulating a thieves guild. That's another good author and has some cool stories about that. But like I mentioned previously, I'm not sure they don't really have a thieves guild per se in Sanctuary in Thieves World. It is different thiefly type factions that maybe work towards that later, but that's part of the interesting part of those characters interacting with each other when someone does try to take over organized crime, like thinking of. Now I can't even think of what it's called. I was going to say it's another one of my inspirations for thievery. I actually did some small bits of Thieves Guild stuff in Kalmata in Sindanor for certain characters who got involved in that sort of thing. And a lot of that was taken from this and then Peaky Blinders, both big inspirations to me for that. I should have thought more about that. It would make sense that we would talk about Thieves Guilds because I think a lot of people consider Thieves World like that, but I don't think that there is a strong Thieves Guild. There's people who want to be a strong Thieves Guild, but I'm not sure there is one in Sanctuary, especially just in the Shadowspawn story. I don't know how many of these other stories you read, but
I just read Shadowspawn in the
all
introduction,
right, perfect. I
um,
don't blame you.
but we'll do more on this. It sounds like so.
It seems like a good thing, maybe. I don't know, but there are so many good ones that it's hard to
Yeah.
say. All right, so let's look at this. A few remarks by Furtwan Coin Pinch Merchant. So this is like you mentioned in the introduction, another way of Offutt giving his idea of who Shadowspawn is, like a description almost.
Yep.
But he does also mention the group that I would say is kind of like a thieves guild or another faction of organized crime when he mentions at the bottom of this, even one of you know whose boys in the blue hawk masks might step aside.
Hmm.
So for you, I could see there's lots of good foreshadowing of different characters in the books.
Yeah. Well, and I thought it was funny this little bit. Um, Almost all of it focuses on Shadowspawn's weapons.
Mm-hmm.
It's a very kind of classic adventure. The kind of, I mean, there's art of adventures with a sword here and a knife here and another knife here and just kind of all over them. And it sounds like Shadowspawn doesn't have a real sword. He says not a proper sword, so not a
Mm-mm.
military man, but he does have all sorts of deadly knives all over him, and that's basically what this character has noticed about him, which I thought was funny and very felt like I'm sure a number of my adventures throughout my years of gaming come across that way to merchants and townsfolk.
And it's cool to see it from that point of view because
Yeah,
normally when especially like an old school game where you don't have a ton of backstory or anything like that, the first thing people usually mention is what kind of weapon they're carrying.
yep,
So it makes some sense that in this sort of example, because it does kind of, this may be a stretch, but it also kind of has an old west frontier feel.
yep,
So, and when you think about, oh yeah, this is what it would sound like if you were asking somebody about like an old west gunslinger or something, but instead of a gunslinger, this guy is certainly a knife slinger. All right,
yep.
so like we mentioned, this is by Andrew Offutt. We're into the actual story itself, which, in case you guys were wondering, is all of about 25 pages or so. There was a total of maybe 30 or pages for today's reading. Um, it seems like he starts basically again. I mean, I was going to mention even in this little introduction, there was tons of like little things that are added in. Ilbarsi knives, like who in the heck are the Ilbarsi? Um, they mentioned the Hellhounds, so you can see that these are some pretty. I don't know if Ilbarsi is that popular, but the Hellhounds are certainly a strong NPCs or
Yeah,
non-controlled, non-author characters, maybe is what you could almost say throughout all of Thieves World, really. And there are even some. I don't know if it's in this book or not, but there are some books or about the Hellhounds, some short stories about them themselves. And in some ways, this is about one of them, but
yep.
perhaps we get too far ahead of ourselves.
What I really liked in this kind of first section that some of it seems to be all of it seems to be things that this character Kushar Lane, who doesn't really appear in the second half of the story at all, has heard. He's kind of just here to gather information about Shadowspawn, but some of it seems to be like actual information, and a fair bit of it is the sort of tales that this character has told about himself or the rumors that have gathered around
Mm-hmm.
him, which I think is a great way to introduce a character in a game is to do that. Kind of. I think there's like a party game version of that where you say like two truths and a lie or something like that, and people try to guess which one is the lie. I think we did that as a team building exercise for my orientation week at college or something like that. But anyway, that concept is, I think, kind of a fun one for introducing a character into a a campaign, either an NPC who's going to have some importance, or even a PC that you could, have the PC tell, have the PC before they walk in, like say a player character got killed last time, and so you're going to have a second or third level character join the second or third level party, and they go into the tavern and they hear the tavern keeper talking about the new guy in town who carries a notched sword, and he's they've heard tell that he's he's got a notch on his sword, one from each of his kills, and there's 20 or 30 of them on there, or something ridiculous like that. That very kind of old west style in some ways, to get back to that. But that would be a great way to introduce a character and have it feel. I'm gonna mute for a second and see what's going on, but I'll be right back.
I totally agree with Arlen. There is certainly that feeling to it. I also mentioned Fred Daniel is watching. Good to have Libram Society to brighten up the day. Thieves Guild is synonymous with Fritz Lieber, or is it Lieber? Fofford and the Grey Mouser, for sure. There is, I would agree. And we'll probably do one of their stories. They have short stories too. We'll probably do one of those stories to compare. I think that is a good, another good thing to pin and put on the list. I would say the first scene is really like almost a series of scenes where, like you said, Cusher Lane is almost like gathering information, presumably about Shadowspawn. And this is where we learn his name is Hans or Haints. I always said Hans or Hans, but it might be Haints with that E on the end. I don't really know. But we hear from people like Shive the Changer, another guy here who has a man called Weasel at the Vulgar Unicorn, talking about when he lost his virginity of all things. They mention a few different places where they think he might be from. Cudgett Swear Oath, and they talk about one of the neighborhoods of Sanctuary, Downwind. So there's lots and lots of flavor even in this just beginning scene. Shive definitely had some more. Customs inspector is what Cusher Lane may actually be. We see.
Yeah, that's what he. It sounds like his job somehow has put him in connection with all of these fences and thieves guild, sort of the characters you would expect for to be members of a thieves guild if a real thieves guild was here.
Yeah, it's just like the underworld, like any
Yeah,
underworld. Yeah, yeah, for sure. Then they talk to like a courtesan or something, I think, but we don't really know what's going on. Like you said, you don't even see Shadowspawn. You just hear people talking about him to this Cusher Lane, and it's very flavorful.
yeah. This first section, you get a whole lot of the kind of whispered rumors and this all interesting stuff about this one character and a lot of other characters, right? I think you mentioned that there's all these interesting little kind of one-off characters essentially who show up as Kashar Lane is going around and talking to them, and they all have something kind of interesting to say and are sort of a character that you could expand on, right? In a game situation, right? Obviously,
Mm-hmm.
with the story, the author has sort of an idea of where the story is going to go, and so they're not necessarily going to need to put that much effort into each kind of one-off NPC. But in a game situation, having that kind of like one interesting, as Hobbes like to say, a lurid detail about each NPC so that you can expand upon it if the players decide that they like that NPC.
Exactly.
Is a great thing to do.
Well, and one of these guys is actually his mentor, right? Is Hans's mentor. Cudgett is Hans's mentor, and when Prince Kadakathis, who they call him Kitty Cat right here, hung him Cudgett. They hung Cudgett as a thief, and so
Yep.
that's another reason that Hans never really says that's why, but I think that's why, and I mean Andrew Offutt, the author of Shadowspawn, I think was using this for future stories as well. The story we get doesn't go too deeply into why Hans is Hans, or why Shadowspawn is Shadowspawn, but it definitely is there for the future, for future books or future novels, let alone short stories, because there are actually some Shadowspawn novels too that eventually came out.
Mm.
And I kind of wonder in some ways if you're an author and you can only control the characters that you make up and you kind of have you don't have total control because people can use them, but the more characters that you introduce in your story, does that give you more power over other people's stories? Maybe that's the wrong way to look at it, but um, totally a meta concept. But so
Yeah.
I think I didn't even really necessarily figure this out. Even the number of times I've read this, every time it's almost kind of like a surprise to me. But Cusher Lane is like in some ways the least important character here, and the other characters who are talking about the things could be more important, but we don't really know because we don't know how important they are to Shadowspawn, the guy that this is about. We do
Yep.
learn a little bit about how they feel about Kadakathis. And I mean, and in the introduction with Hakim and with his story, we learned about the Ilsig versus the Rankins and how the Ilsigi kind of created the town and founded it and what it came from. But this is interesting too because we kind of start to hear some of the things that Shadowspawn has accomplished.
Yeah, yeah, we hear about his different various the people that he's stolen from and the various kind of particulars of his abilities in a lot of ways, which is interesting because I don't think we see that much of his abilities on display in a lot of ways in the
Which
rest of the story.
that's one of my complaints about this story, to be honest, is we have this super huge build up to this big heist story, and then there really
Uh-huh.
is no heist.
Yep.
It just bounces off to the next scene, and then it's all kind of anticlimactic, really.
Yeah, it's kind of an odd thing because there's all this talk about how clever he is and all that sort of stuff, and he's definitely clever. But what he actually does in the heist, right? He goes in through a door that's been left unlocked for him, and goes out by tying a rope to a table and basically rappelling down a wall, which is not nothing, right? Somebody super out of shape or that is more of a skill set like mine, to be honest, probably couldn't do that very effectively. But it's for a supposed to be like a master thief. It's kind of an odd thing.
So Lord Zordran asks on Twitch, would you say that Erickson was influenced by Thieves World? Hmm. I would be surprised if there wasn't some influence there, especially when you start to get into some of the later books,
Mhm.
specifically with Towel. But and maybe just this concept of building. But I mean, Tolkien did it way before these guys did, building culture on culture. So I don't know. I mean,
Yeah.
it would be hard to say that
Although
no one was that not everyone after would be inspired by Thieves World to beat, in my
I
opinion.
think there is something to say that Erickson, if not directly inspired by it, was sort of inspired in a similar way, if that makes sense. Is I think Erickson's relationship to Tolkien is sort of like this kind of Iron Age thing where it's not really um, low power, right? The way that a lot of the
Mm.
superheroes became a lot less powerful, but it is kind of a much sort of grittier, like what would real people who were in these sorts of fantastical situations actually act like, sort of thing. So I wouldn't be surprised if he um if not inspired directly by Thieves World, I suspect he's, inspired by similar things to get to
Well,
a similar point.
in comic books, you have the Golden Age, Silver Age, and then Iron Age. But what came after the Iron Age? What was like Warren Ellis's stuff, like the Authority? Because I mean, I feel like that came after the Iron Age a little bit. Like it
Mhm.
pushed it even one step farther. Where like I don't know. Is there a name for it? Is it called the
I
Bronze
don't
Age
know if
or?
there's a name. I
But I
know that there's sort of I think after the Iron Age the ages get a lot more funky
mm-hmm. Or a
in
bunch of
comics
them.
history.
Well, I would just say that I think that Erickson, Abercrombie, Martin, those guys are even one step past these guys.
Hmm.
In my opinion, they're kind of their own, where like really anyone can die. Like you would never expect Hans Shadowspawn to die in these books. No author but Andrew Offutt can kill him, and is he really going to kill him because it's obviously his baby? Just like you wouldn't
Yeah.
see Bradley's Lethand die, or Tempest, or a lot of the main characters die, but in Abercrombie, for sure, you're going to see main guys die. Obviously, in Martin, you're going to see main guys die. So I think that's almost even one step beyond the grittiness of the Iron Age. It's almost like a postmodern era, or I don't even know what that
Yeah.
means specifically, but that if we're going to talk about it, I think I would consider them to be slightly different. Where almost all the people in this book, all the authors, I mean, in around this era of books, it's a different era, I guess, is what I'm saying, in many,
Yeah.
many, many words.
Well, although I think it is fair to say definitely that Erickson was inspired
Oh
by some other
yes,
things from this era,
oh yeah,
certainly, if
yeah,
not necessarily from Thieves' World, right? Yeah, I know he's talked about The Black Company by Glenn Cook,
yes.
and obviously those books are from a little later than this, I think, but
Um,
similar feel in a lot of
yeah,
ways.
not too. I don't. I think they're pretty close time
Yeah,
wise, especially when you consider that Thieves World, just the first three books were, that took up 6 years or something. It's not like they were immediate. I guess not
yeah,
2 years, 79 to 81, but there were like
yeah,
7 books or something, and then the novels that came. There's some of these authors are still releasing books from characters in Sanctuary, so.
yep.
So anyhow, basically to get back to it, hey, I'm in chat now. Welcome, buddy.
Oh,
We
we've also got a couple comments from Fred Daniel.
I mentioned
Good.
everything up to Fafhrd and the Grey Mouser.
Okay, well, he also says, is Shadowspawn perhaps more reputation than substance as a rogue?
I think this next scene kind of starts to show you that he's at least young and naive in some
Yep.
ways. I
Yep.
don't know if he's less substance, but I do think that he purposely puts on a show, and I don't know how much he would really want to get into a fight if he had to.
Yeah, and I think there is something sort of to be said that his mentor was supposedly a really great thief who apparently only took on this one character, at least that we know of,
Yeah, as an
um,
apprentice.
as an apprentice, which kind of does suggest that maybe he is um, a more capable thief, but he's an opportunistic thief in some ways, right? That he takes advantage of the 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 plots of the other people to make his job as a thief a lot easier.
Which totally makes sense for sure.
Yeah.
So basically, we meet the next main character in this story, which I guess it's actually we meet Hans for the first time, and he
Hmm.
is involved talking to a concubine of Prince Kadakathis, right?
Hmm.
That they have seemingly had a Dumasian run-in with each other in the market, or in the bazaar, is what it's called in Sanctuary.
Yeah.
They've ran into each other, and she seems to enjoy a good double entendre. So she's my favorite character in the story. You certainly do like my gourds, don't you? All right. Anyway, which takes him off guard. Where I think in the scene we really get to see how young maybe Hans is in his
Hmm.
naivety in dealing with a woman, especially a woman of rank. Maybe
Yeah.
she's a concubine, but she still moves in different circles and has different skills than Shadowspawn has.
Yeah.
We hear Jubal's name again. Jubal's the guy who has the hawk masks. And if you had read these in order, you had might have already heard of Jubal. I don't know if he is introduced in a story before now, but he's kind of like a gang leader, kind of. And his gang members wear these blue hawk masks,
Hmm.
which someone may consider that to be maybe a thieves guild, because the guards let them wear these hawk masks and basically do kind of blackmail, enforcement, and that sort of thing on a lot of the merchants to get paid protection money as well. But I don't know if I would really think that as a guild necessarily, as more of like a criminal organization, because I don't really think in. Did you ever watch Peaky Blinders or no?
I watched like one
Oh,
episode.
all right, you're dead to me, Arlen. Anyone who wants to be on the Libram Society that has seen Peaky Blind, no, I'm just kidding, buddy. Anyway, what else did you get out of this scene? Anything?
I thought it was interesting the kind of this and the next scene, I guess, if we
You
want
could
to
talk
talk
about
about
both of
that.
them at the same time. Yeah.
Yeah, that there's a sense that Shadowspawn has sort learned, or Hans has sort of learned one set of skills, and this kind of pampered concubine has learned a very different set of skills, but that they have some relation to each other, if that makes sense. The way that they both have a sense for kind of plotting and stealing and all that sort of stuff. Um, which that was an interesting. It was kind of an interesting way. There's a lot, especially as we get in towards the end. There's a sort of very slight kind of moralistic element about the relationship between the people in power and the people outside of power,
It kind of goes
right?
back to that rule that I said that they have these rules amongst thieves.
Yeah.
Maybe. Yeah. I was gonna say something, but I lost it. But do you have anything else that you wanted to shift? Go ahead into the next scene.
Yeah, let's talk about the next that's when she's talking to Born is the name, right?
Mm-hmm.
Of the her lover who's one of the hellhounds who and they're coming up with a plan to basically discredit um Catechithus um by making it public that the scepter of the empire has been lost.
Oh, that's what I was gonna say. Is we already know that Hans plans to steal the Savank if he can. That's what the scepter's called.
Hmm.
He wants to steal this, so these guys already know that he has that. Maybe they don't know specifically, but he's already planning to do that because he's already stolen like some thing off the barracks rooftop in an area. So this is his
Yeah.
next big deal that people are thinking he wants to do. So I think that's an important part, maybe.
Yeah. And I thought it was talking about Savank. One of the details that I really loved in this story was the idea that this is that the Ronkin people believe it's named for the god that gave it to the emperor. It's kind of just an interesting detail that feels very sort of real world historical. That obviously in this story we don't have any actual evidence of divine intervention. Right? There's no clerics in Sanctuary. It seems like. Um,
There are, but they're not
well,
clerics. They're priests. Yeah, they're
but not like not like clerics in
divine
the D&D
powered.
sense where they can
Oh,
call upon the divine directly.
right. Which I mean
Um,
is common. How often do you actually see a cleric in any fiction?
yeah. Well, and what I'm getting at is this idea of the kind of like this is another layer of sort of the legend around these objects and these things and this whole world that we are pretty sure that this is, a an object that was crafted for one of the Ronkin Empire leaders, one of the emperors at some point, not something given to them by the divine. But it's one of those stories, sort of like Romulus and Remus growing up from the she wolf or something like that. That is a great little bit of legendary, I think.
Yeah, and it's just one more piece of depth, which I would compare to Erickson. So going back to
Yeah.
Lord Zordran's comment, maybe that depth and that way of connecting things and relating it to the real world, because there is a lot of that in here. The Person of the Thousand Eyes, or Eshi, or just different like little pieces that fit in here. That is very that they just kind of off it pieces out to you very without much ado, right? And it's just
Hmm.
small things that we're supposed to accept, and everyone knows in Sanctuary that is here. So
Yeah.
so this next scene basically shows us that that they're looking for a way to discredit Kadakathis, and what better way than for have him to lose the Savank, and just another reason or evidence that Vashanka may not be equal to Ills, or at least Kadakathis isn't powerful enough to hold Vashanka's. Vashanka is like the main god or deity of the Rankin people, who are the current controllers of Sanctuary, and
Hmm.
Ills or Ilsig is the other guy. And there is a lot of that, which also kind of makes me feel like a Moorcock with the law versus chaos. But
Hmm.
instead, I don't think either one of these is law or chaos. They're more like the way that medieval cultures used God, but they always were using God, and they said God was with them or God, but they were both saying it. That's another way that I like gaming, is because I can make sense of religion and the belief in powerful beings, but then you still have characters who don't really believe it anyway. So that, I don't know. I just find that interesting, an interesting concept of how religion works in fiction, and how it's structured, even, or how powerful it used to be, or how much it was used, how much people wagged the dog with it. Because we talk about that today in today's era in politics, of how they turn things to make it work for them, as far as these politicians go, or the legends of politicians. Well, I mean, it was the same thing back in the day with religion, right? They used religion to compel people to do what they wanted.
Well, and there's some interesting. There's always a kind of, especially in.
Oh no, I feel like that was a very important point. Unfortunately, we've lost Arlen. Oh no, guys. All right, it must be time for me to pick up here. All right, I don't know what he was going to say, because I'm sure it was a highbrowed comment, because he is the highbrow to my lowbrow here at the Libram Society. So let's us move forward. So we've met Bourne. We found out about the plot that they have to basically, at the end of that scene, they're basically going to kill Shadowspawn once they send the Savant back to the Emperor to show how worthless Kadakathis is. So in the next scene, we kind of get a better idea of seeing what Hans is doing, or what his thoughts are, or what his normal acts are. So he basically heads off to Sedanzo, who is kind of like a Romani fortune teller. And we see the Sedanzo in a few different places. Not this one specifically. This one's called Moonflower, but they say some Sedanzo have the gift, and they say that some don't. And I guess we find, and we learn a little bit about Sedanzo culture, that they often like to wear really piles of skirts, and just kind of their nature, which really gives you kind of a Romani feel. I've used when I ran my game in not White Sands specifically, but a different area of that campaign. I definitely had it wasn't a Sedanzo. She was from somewhere else. I don't remember where she was from, but it was almost a straight rip of Moonflower and another Sedanzo character that they are quite a few stories of in Thieves World. We've moved on to the next scene. Arlen is made his way back to Libram Society Studios, and in here we're just basically talking about my own RPG experiences and how I've used the Sedanzo to tell stories, or in my own campaigns, and another inspiration of this character that I've used in past games. But basically, what we find out is you're muted still, by the way. We find out that she sees or realizes he's that he's being set up, that he is going to be set up and then discarded. So he's gotten indication or some inside information that he's basically being set up. And so this is, I think, where we would normally expect some kind of heist scene where they're gathering stuff, and he's doing all these different things, going through people, setting up whatever his plot is, making special rope to get away, or what you would normally see in a one of those in a heist story. I think that we're used to particular things that would happen that it hasn't necessarily happened in this particular story, because, like we said, it kind of sneaks past your expectations. And I think I almost feel like maybe I can see why he did it, because I mean the heist is like one page, in a 25, 30 page story. One page isn't very much for kind of what it feels like the whole thing's been leading up to. But that's what tells me that the whole thing isn't really about the heist at all. It's really more, the story itself is really about how people, maybe even how you see yourself compared to how other people see you and how you really are. That there's three different levels of that.
Okay, I have audio again.
Welcome back, my friend.
Hi, sorry for the technical difficulties.
No problem. I don't know if you could hear me. Could you hear what I was saying?
I could not hear. TriCast said that you or somebody dropped and
Oh
something.
no,
Yeah, so
I forgot
I
about TriCast again.
could not hear anything,
No,
but
no,
I
it's
am
still going.
okay. Well, hopefully it'll collect everything correctly.
No, you got dropped from everything. You got dropped from Discord. But anyway, it doesn't matter. Let's move on. All right.
All
So I
right.
was just saying, I would just moved us past the scene with the Sedanzo Moonflower, and then I was
Hmm.
explaining that what this, because we don't really see an interesting heist aspect because it's all done. It's done in one page. That the story really isn't about this heist at all. I think more deeply, the story could be said to be maybe about how other people see us versus how we see ourselves versus how we really are. That's kind of really maybe what this story is really about. What do you think?
Yeah,
Seem kind of
yeah.
deeper or no? I don't know.
No, I think that's a lot of what this story is about. Is the kind of um, presentation versus reality element, which even a kind of clever element of our so Shadowspawn is presented as our protagonist, and then after the heist and after a couple of events later, Catechithis is sort of our protagonist for the last kind of third of the story, which is kind of an interesting, and I think a lot of that thematic stuff actually ties into him as well,
Mm.
because he is very much a character that he, even though we've sort of been primed for this in some ways by talking about Shadowspawn and having him sort of lurking in the background the whole time, but all that stuff about, is Shadowspawn actually a great rogue, or is he just kind of hyping himself up? All that sort of stuff. That sort of applies to Catechithis too, in the sense of, is he actually just unable to control everything, or is he kind of doing a good job?
Yeah,
Or
an opposite, right?
yeah,
Everyone thinks he's so bad, but maybe he isn't. So if
yep,
we were going to get back to the scenes, he basically just easily walks in, steals the Savak, gets away, and now we kind of see how Hans tries to plan through his how what he's going to do and to not get discarded, right?
yep.
And I'm not even positive I know exactly what he did. All I really get out of this is that he set up a meeting with Bourne through, like, why is it Bourne that's there?
I think he just said to send one of the Hellhounds, because there's a detail in the narration. There's a thing about kind of an unlikely circumstance, a quirk of circumstance, right?
Oh, basically that's he sends Hakim to the Prince Governor.
Yeah, he sends Hakeem to the prince, and then the prince sends Born. And I think the idea is that Hans had just asked for the prince to send somebody, and it turns out to be Born, who is in on the plot,
But
right? And
I
so,
think they made it be. I got the impression that through either Lorraine or Bourne made it be Bourne, because it says next came the coincidence, though it wasn't all that much one. Zabar and Quag were sword happy hotheads. He would never be able to send them, so they didn't have to do anything to make sure it wouldn't be him. Razkuli complained of fire in the gut and had the runs besides, so they gave him food poisoning. Right?
mhm.
That's what I thought. That left only two who the prince could send. So it was either going to be Bourne or someone else.
Oh, I thought it just meant that that all of these other things, it was just sort of like a random chance between the two of them,
Yeah,
that who the prince chose, and
I
it
don't
just
think it
happened to.
was necessarily though. because I mean, I obviously Bourne wanted to go, right?
Yeah,
Because he was
yeah,
gonna. That was the whole plan. That was his and Lorraine's plan, is to get the Savant and then send it on to the Emperor, so Cadacus would be, embarrassed. Which also kind of reminds me, this particular feels a little Three Musketeers, where you're trying to discredit people without killing anyone important.
hmm,
You can kill the expendable people because they're expendable, but the important people you can't mess with because the ramifications would be too much. So I
yeah,
like that political maneuvering, and that's very non D&D, but I think it's a D&D aspect that a lot of people would like to add to their games if they could. Like, but how do
yeah,
you make it so your murder hobo PCs don't just kill everybody they meet? How do you get them to understand that the ramifications of that would be way too big? Like, if you have the right group, you can do it, but I
hmm.
don't think that everyone is the right group. So here's some methodology. And so basically, Bourne and Hans get in this fight, and it's kind of an interesting display. But then, if I'm right, doesn't he basically kill Bourne? No, he doesn't even get him killed, does he? He falls in the gosh darn well.
Yeah, Hans falls in the well with the treasure. The prince shows up with another loyal man after Bourne has done his kind of villain explaining the plan thing, and the prince sort of says, "Oh, well, now we know." So Bourne tries to kill him, and so the prince kills him. And then the prince talks to Hans down the well and basically says, "If you want to live, play along." And then goes and gets more men to come and pull Hans out of the well, and it turns out to do a thing with Bourne's body, so that they can pretend that the prince later on can pretend that he caught Bourne sleeping with his concubine, and pretend to stab him, essentially, um, to prove that he's a tough warrior and all that sort of stuff to the rest of his hellhounds.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and then there's a little bit of just light torture for Hans in there, and then we skip ahead from the torture scene to the prince basically explaining what happened to Hans.
Like a
And
denouement almost.
yeah,
Yeah. So, but this is my question: why would Prince Cadacus and this Hellhound show up unless he already knew part of the plot?
so I think he had some sense that
Yeah.
that
Did Hakeem
whoever
tell
he,
him a little more? Was did Hans already have him in, or because I mean that feels like a plot hole? Or I've always just kind of added somehow that Cadacus knew, which maybe gives you even more indication that he's better at being a governor than anyone gives him credit for.
yeah, I don't know if it's clear. I it's definitely possible that Hans suggested for the prince to show up, um, to make sure that he actually got, because Hans seems to, once he knows about the kind of secondary plot, seems to want the prince to get the scepter back and to sort of foil that other section of the plot,
Mm-hmm.
right? The kind of secondary plot. So it's possible they told him, or that Catechithus is just cleverer than we expected, and knows to distrust Bourne a little bit.
And Hans also gives this confession that he's never killed anyone either.
Yep. Despite the fact that he's covered in knives.
Right, which is just kind of more indication that he is maybe more show than he is actual, and more
Yeah.
reputation than substance, perhaps. But I
Yep.
think the cleverness is certainly there.
Yeah. Well, and that's a sort of, people talk about, especially with old school D&D, the idea that fighting is sort of a last resort. And I
Mm.
think that's one of the things that is definitely present in this story, is this idea that, when you can, you want to win by, outmaneuvering your opponent. You don't, if the blades come out, that's sort of the kind of problematic, essentially, right?
Mm-hmm.
For your plans, because once the swords come out, who knows what happens.
Yeah. So I think we've pretty much covered it. I kind of went into a lot of the stuff I would normally say to the end in the middle there. I think when I was kind of comparing what the story was really about. But I mean, there's a lot of setup in here, and it's left for a lot of
Yeah,
interpretation. So
yeah,
after all this, how are you feeling about this story, Arlen?
yeah. I'm still feeling good. I liked the story. Um, there's a couple of things that I think are not as there's a couple of sequences that I feel like could have been not necessarily done better, but done a little bit. Like if I were writing it, I would have done it a little bit differently or tried to kind of go over it. Although I know a lot of these pulp writers, were just churning out stories. So I don't know how much time Andrew Offutt actually spent with this story. That's kind of one of the interesting questions about a lot of this um,
And I do
pulp
kind of
entertainment
wonder,
stuff.
yeah, did it have something to do with just how short it had to be? And he had to cut things, and so that's just what he decided to do.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and
It
like
is an
having
anthology, so
the whole sequence with the concubine and the hellhound talking to each other and saying like, and here's sort of our plan. And I was sort of like, oh, if there was a sort of clever way to let us know about that without just sort of directly talking about that, I think that might be a little stronger. Um, like we almost don't need that scene. Obviously the story is not very long, so it doesn't necessarily need to be cut down that much, but
yeah, because maybe the
Hans
denouement
figures out about all that sort of stuff. So if
only
we
through the
wanted, we could just
Sedanzo.
stay with Hans and learn about it all through
Yeah,
him instead of
yeah.
having that
But I mean, I
moment.
feel like that almost it kind of gives it that noir feel where we
Yeah.
know what's happening, and then maybe that adds to that aspect of the genre. I don't know.
Yeah. No, that's definitely a good point. There's some genre elements there. But anyway, no, I thought the story was good. I liked it. I'm gonna have to read some more of Thieves' World to see what the
Well,
world is like.
remember, it's all different authors, so that's. I see Fred Daniel had a comment here on the YouTubes. There always seem to be the gods in play in Sanctuary, divine intervention. Does Kitty Cat benefit from God talk? I don't really feel like there was that much about gods in this particular story, especially no intervention. Did you feel like there was?
No, although there is the sort of mystical element of the
Oh, the Sedanzo omen reading almost.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah, that's true. But I don't.
So
I don't really feel like the Sedanzo aren't really considered Ilsig or rank, so I don't know where that fits in exactly. They're kind of
I'm not sure either.
so. But like, I would reiterate that I've used tons of stuff in my own games, even the Emergent Empires. I can't say that it's like directly ripped, but you can see the color of it in a lot of the stuff that I write and the way that I do in the stories that I run have this lurid feeling of anybody can die, but most likely these characters probably won't, but they are still zeros to hero, and they maybe have a much bigger reputation or a much bigger bark than they do a bite.
Mhm.
I would say I kind of feel like I have more respect for the story with the revelation or the epiphany that it does kind of have maybe a deeper theme than I even recognized. It's not just a story for a story's sake. It really is kind of maybe saying something about that human element of how people view themselves and stuff. But and I may just be reading that in too. I don't know, but it seems
No,
like a very good example
I think
of it.
that's definitely there in this story. Um, and there's another. I mentioned also the kind of relationship between like the people who have power and the people who don't,
Mm-hmm.
and I think there's some of that too. The sense of Shadowspawn right at the end. I can't remember what he actually says, but he says something, and there's a thing about the prince is likely to repeat that. A line about how the poor people steal and the rich people kill or something like that,
Mm-hmm.
or the people without power steal but the people with power kill. um, I thought there was sort of an undercurrent of that, the way that like the concubine and the hellhound were willing to just kind of use Shadowspawn and then have him killed, right? Versus Shadowspawn. Not that he is a paragon of virtue by any means, but he just doesn't have the opportunity to manipulate people quite that way.
Yeah, not to go that far. It's almost like I don't think they life is cheap in Sanctuary, but I don't believe the citizens of the town feel cheap or that their
Mhm.
fellow citizens are cheap. That's kind of maybe, which I think most of the time, maybe in real life, it isn't. Sometimes I wonder if things are changing in that way. And I don't mean to get super political or theoretical about modern day, but there is less of like, people are more willing to kill than it seems like they used to be, which was kind of maybe an old school idea. And maybe that's the change in those ages that we were talking about, where life seems cheap, but the characters themselves don't treat it cheaply. But then
Mhm.
it did become cheap when you look farther into the Authority or into movies of that later age, or Abercrombie or Martin or
Yeah. Yeah.
Erickson. Yeah, where life really is cheap and everyone treats it cheaply, like they're cutting down people all over. But that isn't totally true because Conan cuts down hundreds of people in every book.
Yeah.
But I don't know. Anyhow, I think does that wrap everything up? Have I ever asked you the question yet, Arlen? Because I don't think we've been together in this.
What's the question?
Bantam, Tor, or Del Rey?
Oh, I have no idea. I so rarely notice who published a book unless it's like from, a small specialty publisher where I buy all of their stuff. So like if you ask me Pushkin Press, I know about them
Is that the
because they
Polish
publish
press?
they no, they publish interesting kind of stuff in translation.
Oh,
Um
the reason I brought that up is because Kustash, one of the Twitchers, Twitch hoodie, mentioned in the Gamerhood Discord that they are republishing the Malazan books in
nice.
Poland or something like that. So he wondered if it was our influence, and I'm pretty sure it was.
I'm sure that's what it was.
Anyhow, this has been episode number 6 of the Libram Society. We did the short story Shadowspawn in Thieves' World, the book edited by Robert Lynn Asprin. I'm Jason.
And I'm Arlen.
This is TJ Drennan taking it away.